now that we have built our theory of the consumer behavior and that for the supply side of the market, we can bring the two together and describe the market in general. I'm your host, Elias. So with this, let's start by looking at the market. So a market is any institution or mechanism that brings together buyers and sellers of particular goods, services, or resources for the purpose of exchange. Now, this means that a market need not be a physical place only where you find people selling tomatoes and then you buy tomatoes or vegetables and so on. A market is any arrangement. It can be online when you trade, as long as the buyer and the seller are engaged and they are exchanging currency for goods and so on, then we have a market. A market should have the demand side and the supply side. Whatever the arrangement you have, it will be a market only when there is demand and supply. So it can be on a telephone call, on a phone call, where you're calling somebody and then do a transfer via your phone and then your goods are delivered. That constitutes a market for such a product. Now, in a market, equilibrium occurs at a point where demand equals supply. And remember, we said that in the market we have a number of individuals, individual consumers, and a number of individual sellers of a product. So let's look at how this is done. So on the vertical axis, we put the price of a commodity, and on the horizontal axis, we put the quantity of a product. Now, this quantity here refers to both quantity demanded and quantity supplied, because in a market, we have both the demand and the supply side. So with the demand, which we showed earlier, being downward sloping and the supply curve being upward sloping, then we have our point E, which is the equilibrium point. And this is a point where the demand is equal to the supply. And the associated price at that equilibrium point E is called the equilibrium price. And here we've denoted it using PE. So P subscript E. And the associated quantity there is called the equilibrium quantity. And in this session, we've denoted it using E subscript E, Q E, where E is the subscript. So therefore, we have the market for a given commodity where buyers, represented by the demand curve, and the sellers, represented by the supply curve, are in equilibrium at point E, with the quantity demanded and supplied being equal at QE with the equilibrium price PE. Let's take an example. Suppose that the demand and supply function of a good are given by the equation. So for demand, 25 minus a half P, and for quantity supplied equal negative 50 plus 2P. Now where P, QD, and QS denote the price, quantity demanded, and quantity supplied respectively. The questions are: determine the equilibrium price and quantity. And secondly, sketch the graph showing the above equilibrium point. Now you notice that the second part is in red, which would require you to try and do the sketching, but because we have not done any sketching so far to show you how you can do this one, I will sketch it here so that you can follow through and then answer some questions which will be similar to what we have here. So let's look at the solution. So remember that in equilibrium, quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. This means that we get the quantity demanded equation, which is 25 minus half P, and equate it to the quantity supplied equation, which is negative 50 plus 2P. And if we rearrange this, that is, we take negative half p to the other side, which will make it a positive, and get negative 50, bring it the other side, which will make it a positive, then we will have this equation where we have 25. Now 50 has crossed the equal sign to become a positive 50. And the negative half p has crossed the equal sign to become positive half. Now remember that in mathematics, what happened here is that we multiplied this part. So what we had to do is, we added. So this side we added half p, and the other side we added half p. And then this side we added 50, and the other side we added 50, so that whatever we do on the left side is also done on the right side. But the basic or the common way students understand this is simply by stating that the negative crossed the equal sign and became positive, and this negative 50 crossed the equal sign and became positive 50. So then what we have this side is that we will have this half, which we need to clear. So we multiply through by 2. So maybe let me take you back to this part. So if I multiply this equation, now I'll do it here. So I have 25. So what I want to do is to get rid of this half. So if I have to get rid of this half, whatever I do this side must be done throughout this equation. So then I'll have this multiplied by 2 over 1, which will just be 2 plus 50 multiplied by 2 over 1, which will just be 2, is equal to 2p multiplied by 2 over 1, which will just be 2, plus half p multiplied by 2 over 1, which will just be 2. So that this 2 here and this 2 will cancel, and then I'll remain with p, meaning if I simplify this equation, here I'll have 50 plus 100, 50 times 2, so 100 is equal to 2 times 2, so I'll have 4p here, and then I'll remain with a p here. So now you see that we don't have any fraction in this equation, and therefore it is easier for us to complete it by finding the value of p. The previous one here, we had this half, and therefore we needed to get rid of it and then work with whole numbers through and through. But if you are able to navigate without changing it to this part, it's still okay as long as you don't get confused. Okay, so with this then, we can pick it up from here that what we will have is 50 plus 100 is equal to 4p plus p, which will reduce to 150 is equal to 5p. That is 4p plus p, which will be 5p, and 50 plus 100 will be 150. And if I simplify this, I will divide through by 5 so that I get rid of this 5 here. So if I do that, I'll remain with a p equal to 30 units. So whatever units you will have, whether it's in quarter, in dollars, pounds, and so on. So if you're not given the units, you also leave it without units. But if you have the currency used, it means you have to include the currency used when presenting your final answer. Okay, so now we have found the equilibrium price. We now need to find the equilibrium quantity. To get the equilibrium quantity, we substitute the value of P into either the demand function or the supply function. And if we do that, suppose we picked the supply function, which is Q equal to negative 50 plus 2P. Now we know what the value of P is here. So this means that this will be equal to negative 50 plus 2 multiplied by, now P is what we found to be 30. So all we do is put 30 there, and if we simplify this, we will have negative 50 plus 60. And then this will give us positive 10. meaning that our equilibrium quantity is equal to positive 10. So I'm putting an asterisk here just to show that we have our equilibrium quantity. If you want, you can use a subscript E here to show that it's equilibrium quantity. It's still okay, even if you leave it without any of these superscript or subscript. Okay, so now just to bring the well-organized words, so what we have then is that from here we substituted 30 where there was P, and this left us with negative 50 plus 60, and then we got Q equal 10. Now that we have our equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, we can make a conclusion that therefore the equilibrium price is 30 and the equilibrium quantity is 10. So given this, we have answered our part 1 of the question, which was asking us to determine the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So equilibrium price is 30 while the equilibrium price is, the equilibrium quantity is 10. We now turn to sketching the graph. So needed was that we sketch the graph. So now let's have our demand function and our supply function. Now starting with our demand function, for us to sketch the graph, we need to know the intercepts. So before we do that, we have to note that in our structuring, we put price on the vertical axis and the quantity on the horizontal axis. Now, remember we said that this quantity involves both the quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So we just put quantity because we are in the market. So we don't need to put quantity demanded. Because once we put quantity demanded here, it means we are disregarding the quantity supplied part. So we denote the horizontal axis in the market with quantity. And if the quantity was measured in thousands or billions, we would have included written quantity in brackets measured in thousands or millions or billions, whatever the units. And if we are looking at guavas, for example, then it will be quantity of guavas. Okay, now let's sketch our graph. So we start with the demand function. Now for us to sketch the demand function, we look at the structure of the equation. So this equation here, which is our demand function, is a linear function, which means that just finding the intercepts for the two axes will guarantee us to come up with a straight and clear demand curve. So now to do that, we need first to find the horizontal intercept as well as the vertical intercept. Now with that, if we pick this equation, the horizontal intercept is the value or is the number when price is 0. Meaning along the quantity axis, the price of a commodity is 0. As such, we put 0 where there is P in the demand function and then solve for Q. Let's do that together. So now we have our Q, which I will simply just denote as Q, is equal to 25 minus half P. So now where there's P here, remember we're saying it will be 0, so I'll put 0 here. Which means that the whole of this part will become 0 because I'm multiplying negative half times 0, which will make everything 0. And therefore, the quantity when price is 0, the quantity demanded, let me even put D there. The quantity demanded when price is 0 will be 25. Meaning my coordinate which I'm plotting is 25, 0. So I have found my horizontal intercept. My horizontal intercept will be 25, 0. And if I put that on this graph, then I will have my 25 somewhere there. So we have 25 here, comma 0, because this part is 0 here. So this is my horizontal intercept. And given this, I need also to know my vertical intercept. So vertical intercept is the value of P when quantity is 0. It means that on the vertical intercept for the demand function, the quantity demanded will be 0. Therefore, given my demand function QD, which is equal to 25 minus half P, okay, sorry, so we have half P. If my quantity demanded is 0, it means I will have 0 is equal to 25 minus half P. If I take this part, the other side, it will become positive, meaning I'll have half P, positive half P is equal to 25. Now remember that I'm dealing with a fraction here, so to get rid of the fraction, I have to multiply the whole of this equation by the reciprocal of this fraction, which means that I have to multiply both sides of the equation with 2 over 1. Doing that, I'll have 2 over 1 multiplied by 1 over 2p, because I want to get rid of the coefficient and not the p, so I leave the p there, which will give me 2 over 1 multiplied by the 25, which was already there. So that these 2 and these 2 will cancel, so 1 will just cancel with 1, which means I will remain with a p here. So my p will be equal to, if I multiply 2 times 25, this will give me 50. Meaning that when quantity demanded is 0, the price will be 50. And therefore, the vertical intercept will be 0, 50. So what I'm plotting is 0, 50. So transferring this information onto the graph, what we will have is the vertical intercept of 50. And if I get my ruler and join the 2 points, that is the point here at 50, okay, and the point here at 25, if I join the 2 points with a straight line, I will have my demand curve looking like that one. In the same way, if I want to plot my supply function, my supply curve given the supply function, then I will have to find my vertical intercept as well as the horizontal intercept, because this equation is linear. Therefore, joining the 2 points will give me the supply function, and I mean the supply curve. Okay, so with that, let's find first the horizontal intercept, which I will have, just for the purpose of drawing, I can extend this with this arbitrary line, okay? But you don't need it anyway. As long as you know where it's coming from, you can simply plot the demand curve. I mean the supply curve. So to find the horizontal intercept, remember the value of the vertical the P, which is the price, will be 0. So with that, getting the supply equation, which we are working with, so it means that the quantity supplied will be equal to negative 50 plus 2. So I have, 2p. So I will make this my 2. Then my p will be 0. And if I simplify this part will cancel because I'm multiplying 0 by a number, so which will give me 0. And therefore my quantity supplied will be negative 50. Now it is because of this negative value that we are removing from this part. We are not extending, because in economics negative values do not add sense to our analysis. So we just keep it out and deal with positive values. But for the purpose of the intercept, it means that given this, then our coordinate will be negative 50, 0, where the second value is the vertical axis value, and the first value goes for the horizontal. Meaning we are plotting negative 50 along this line. So we can just assume that our negative 50 is somewhere there. Meaning if we get our vertical intercept, which will lie somewhere here, then the line will come cut, then go up to form our supply curve. But because we are not interested in this negative part, this part here, we can simply remove this part and then start our supply from this part going up. But because my paper now looks messy, I will have to remove all this and then present the supply equation well for you. Okay, so now let's find our vertical intercept. Our vertical intercept is the value of P when quantity is 0. With that, given our supply function QS, it means we will have quantity supplied 0, which will be equal to negative 50 plus 2P. Negative 50 plus 2P. And if we make we rearrange this, it means 50 can cross, negative 50 can cross the equal sign to become positive 50. And therefore, what we'll have is that 2P is equal to positive 50. If we divide it through by 2, we will have 50 standing alone, P standing alone here, so P will be equal to 25. So given this, then what we are plotting is 0, 25. Okay, so which means that the value of P when Q is 0 is 25. And therefore, we need to locate where this 25 is along the vertical intercept and then plot the 25. If we do that, we will have our 25 coming down there. Now, you will notice that now that we have our vertical intercept, and remember that our horizontal intercept was lying below here on this dotted line, which we can assume to be somewhere here, have our negative 50, and so on. Then when we join the 2 points, we will have our supply curve. So joining then gives us that supply curve, which is upward sloping. And it should be noted here that the point of equilibrium is 10 units and the price of 30. So quantity, equilibrium quantity was 10 that we saw, and the equilibrium price, we found it to be 30. So this point here where these two are meeting, this part here, is what we refer to as the equilibrium point. Okay, so we can just denote it by E, just to show that this is a point E. So E has no economic meaning. You can put anything there. We're just using it to denote that we are in equilibrium and we are referring to a given point. Okay, so now let's look at excess demand, or simply a shortage in the market. Now, excess demand occurs when the commodity price is below the equilibrium price. At any price below the equilibrium price, there will be a shortage of commodities. This is because when price is set below the equilibrium, it means that any price reduction according to the law of demand will increase the quantity demanded. But from the supply side, a reduction in price is a demotivation for suppliers to release products on the market, and therefore they will reduce the quantity supplied on the market. And this is what will cause a shortage in the market for a given commodity. So given our equilibrium, initial equilibrium point, point E, where the demand and the supply function meet and the equilibrium price P1 with equilibrium quantity QE, a reduction in price, say to P2, will lead to a shortage in the market. Now you will notice from here that when price reduces from P1 to P2, the quantity supplied will reduce down to point A, and the quantity supplied will increase all the way to point B. And just denoting this with the quantities under there, it means that our quantity supplied will reduce to QS, where our quantity demanded will go to QD. The distance between point A and point B is a shortage, or simply the excess demand. Whereas consumers are happy that now they can purchase a commodity at a low price and therefore increase their quantity demanded because they want to buy more, the supplier is demotivated by the low price, and therefore the quantities which the suppliers release on the market reduce. And therefore this gap between what the consumers want to get given the current new price and what suppliers are willing to release on the market, this gap is what we call the excess demand or the shortage in the market. With that, it means that if price was to go below the equilibrium price, say to P2, then we will not be in equilibrium because demand will not be equal to supply. What we are seeing here is that when the price is at P2, quantity demanded becomes greater than quantity supplied. And therefore, we are not in equilibrium because equilibrium only exists when quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. If this equation fails to hold, it means we are not in equilibrium. So the situation we have is that quantity demanded is more than the quantity supplied on the market. The bigger question is, how then do we attain equilibrium if we have excess or a shortage in the market? How do we ensure that the market is back in equilibrium? To do so, let's consider the second graph here. So now, because there is a shortage, consumers will bid up the prices as they will be willing to pay more to get the commodities. And this is likely to lead to what we call the black market. Because consumers are willing to pay more, they are likely to go behind doors to pay more money to get the limited commodities that are on the market. Consider two individuals, John Banda and Mary. If John Banda wanted to buy a commodity, say at the equilibrium reduced price, P2, which is below the equilibrium price, and then Mary knows that if she goes to buy that commodity, she will not find it because John Banda will have already bought that item. What Mary is likely to do is that Mary will connive with the seller to sell the commodity at a higher price and reserve it for her. John Banda will go to look for that commodity and John will not find it because the commodity has been reserved for Mary, who is willing to pay more. And if John Banda also decides to offer more, it means suppliers will also start increasing their quantities released on the market, but still hidden behind because they want to offer them to those who are willing to pay more. And this is what we call the black market. People will be buying things beyond the normal prices and in hidden. So as such, the price will keep rising until we go back to equilibrium. In other words, consumers will keep pushing the prices up on their own in pursuit to get the commodities that they want. And graphically, that information can be plotted as this. So what we will notice is that because of this shortage, consumers will be bidding the prices up, and as this continues, at every level of a price increase, the suppliers will be motivated to supply more commodities on the market. And according to the law of supply, the higher the price, the more the quantity will be supplied on the market. For the consumers, those who are not able to bid the prices up will simply give up buying the commodity or simply reduce the amount of the commodities that they can get. And as such, because the price is higher, according to the law of demand, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and therefore we'll be seeing the reduction, a movement along the demand curve, gravitating towards the equilibrium point. And at the equilibrium point, we will notice that the quantity demanded will have reduced down to QE, and the quantity supplied will have increased up to QE. Therefore, the only way to restore equilibrium in this market is for consumers to continue bidding the prices, given that there is no control of the government whatsoever. It's just a free market economy. Okay, let's look at excess supply, or the surplus in a market. Now, excess supply, which we also call the surplus in a market, occurs when the commodity price is above the equilibrium price. Now, what this is that because the price has been set above P1, which is above equilibrium price, the producers or suppliers of a commodity will be motivated to release more units on the market. To them, a higher price is an indication that if they sold off everything that they have, they will make maximum profit. Therefore, a rise in price will lead them to release more units, and according to the law of supply, the higher the price, the more the quantity supplied. Now, if you look at the consumers, a higher price is a disincentive for them. They are now facing a high price to get the units, the commodity that they want. And as such, according to the law of demand, they will reduce the quantity supplied, holding all other factors constant. Meaning, given that their income has not changed, given that their taste has not changed, only the price has increased, consumers will reduce their quantity supplied. And we see that at any price above the equilibrium price, there will be a surplus of a commodity. And presented, we see then that that information will look like this one, where price has increased from P1 to P2, and this P2 now is above the equilibrium point E. And at this point, at this new price, quantity demanded will be QD equal to at point A here, while quantity supplied will be QS at point B. And the gap between A and B is what we call the excess supply, or simply a surplus on this market. The same question we asked when we were looking at excess demand can still be asked here and find the answer to it. How do we attain equilibrium? Because at P2, we are not in equilibrium. At P2, our quantity demanded is less than our quantity supplied. And we stated that the only way equilibrium can be attained is if the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So now that we see that this equation can't hold here, how do we attain the equilibrium? The answer is on the following graph. Now we see that because of this surplus, producers will bid down the prices as they will be willing to accept less to sell their commodities off. Again here, we are seeing another black market. So what will happen is that suppliers will be going to sell commodities to people who are even passing nearby, and then convince them to buy the products. Think of a day when you went in town to buy some, say, clothes or shoes, and then you meet this guy passing who is selling those items that you want. But because he has given you a higher, you've received a higher price from the other side of the market, probably you would want to get something cheaper. As you walk down the road, a gentleman or a lady approaches you and gives you an item, say a shoe, and tells you that the shoe is 250 kwacha. Because you know that in other outlets you found that shoe somewhat even cheaper or of the same range, you would want to proceed to go and buy it elsewhere. But the guy will keep asking you and persuading you to buy that item, and you will you will accept anything even less than what you found in other shops. And then, if you buy the commodity at a lower price, it shows that the seller knows that there is excess in the market and therefore the sales are low. For him to get rid of those items, he has to beat the price down. Now, if this be the case, information will be known in the market that other sellers are even reducing the prices below the set price, and therefore every person supplier will keep on reducing the price until we are back in equilibrium. The price will keep reducing, and with that, graphically, we see that moving away from point A and B, where we have price P2, the producers will be bidding down the price, and we will be gravitating back towards point E. And at that part, these arrows should point the other side, that we are going back to our equilibrium. So this demand should be taking us back, and this side from this supply back, and this demand taking us back there. So that is it with the excess demand and excess supply. If you have questions, please send an email to muauelias@gmail.com. I will see you in the next session.